Hold on 1 second. Pause the record.
Now you get to start on that.
All right.
Now screen share.
So
Me?
Yeah, hold on. So that's me. Why are we getting feedback? Oh, is that because I'm, hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. All right, go ahead. Now go.
Okay.
Ask if everybody can hear you.
Can everybody hear me today? Great. Good to see you guys
No,
here.
okay, here, let's see. Go off screen share for a second.
Okay.
Yes, she said yes, you're good.
So now,
You're good to go.
how do I get back on?
I just screen share, you're all set.
All right, so we're ready to get started. Okay. So thank you for coming today. Welcome to my presentation on Haggadah in history, the picturesque, the pious, and the protests. Thank you to Rabbi Zach and to Rabbi Newman and to the entire Torah Emet community. It's great to be back here in person after such a long gap. The last time we did it was only via Zoom, and I'm happy to be here with people in person today and hope we can continue to do that. Our goal today is to look at the Haggadah mostly as a physical object rather than at the text of the Haggadah itself. Specifically, we will be considering the aesthetic aspects of the Haggadah, and we will consider it as a cultural artifact to see what we can learn about Jews in certain epochs and regions. Early rabbinic sources contain a great deal of information about the Seder and its requisite liturgical components, but we don't have a clear or precise idea of exactly how a Seder proceeded. Rabbi Mordechai Breuer, a few years back, he has an essay where he actually argued that the Seder was completely inverted from the way that we have it today, before the destruction of the Second Temple and after the Second Temple. And for example, he says, how can we have at the beginning the 4 questions if none of these things even happened yet? So that's one of the proofs that he uses. But I'm just saying, we're not sure 100% how a Seder proceeded in antiquity. By the Gaonic period, the 600s, 700s, 800s, it seems that the text by then was pretty much set. But our earliest Haggadah texts that we have today from that period are only fragmentary. And the earliest complete extant Haggadah that we have are from the 10th century. And they actually come from Minhag Eretz Yisrael, the Eretz Yisrael rite, which is no longer practiced today, but those are the earliest complete Haggadah that we have. And Haggadah, pretty early on, they started to illustrate them. The first dated Haggadah with any type of illustration comes from about the beginning of the 14th century, which may sound late, but it's actually pretty early because the first dated illustrated manuscripts in Hebrew only come from about a century before that. And even that isn't really so late, because until that point, Christian manuscripts were copied and illustrated and illuminated mostly in clerical institutions and scriptoria. And only in the 13th century, there was a shift from the religious institutions to private and commercial institutions. And that sort of opened up the field for others to come in. And it seems to be that's one of the reasons that Jews started to get involved in this aesthetic manuscript production at the beginning of the 13th century. So what were some of the motivations for producing illustrated or illuminated or decorated Haggadot? So first of all, there's simple aesthetic pleasure. People like things that look nice, whether it's a house or a car or a book. Also, very often these illustrations had a didactic purpose. So for people who perhaps were illiterate or semi-illiterate, or for children, or even for people who were fully literate, but they weren't sure always how to do certain parts of the Seder service, the illustrations could be very helpful. And there may have also been an idea of Hidur Mitzvah, the idea of you just want to make something beautiful. And it's something that we definitely see later on mitzvot, where there is a clear sense that's why some of these people are commissioning these beautiful manuscripts. What was the reaction to these illustrated manuscripts in the Jewish world? So I mentioned that the Haggadot started at around the beginning of the 1300s in Spain and in northern Spain, and also in the Upper Rhine at about the same time. And a little bit earlier in the 13th century, we also start to see Hebrew Bibles and also Machzorim. And the reaction was a little bit mixed. So on the one hand, obviously there was enough of a positive reaction, because had there not been that positive reaction, these manuscripts would not have been produced. It was a very, very, very expensive endeavor to produce a manuscript, one of these beautiful manuscripts. It was way beyond the reach of the average person. And even a simple manuscript that was not illustrated was very expensive. Think of buying a Torah scroll today, a Sefer Torah. If you go to a scribe, from what I understand, we actually talked about this somebody in the last 2 visits ago, that there's been some inflation during COVID in Sefer Torah, but beforehand, a new Torah scroll would cost about $50,000. And that's in the modern age when there's a lot of commercial manufacture of the parchment. We're going back to a time when parchment was very hard to come by, and to get prepared parchment, you had to hire a scribe, and even to get the ink, you had to get special ingredients that may or may not have been available during certain seasons where you were living. So it was an extremely, extremely expensive endeavor. So the fact that these manuscripts exist means that, you know, people love them. But there was also opposition to these illustrated manuscripts. And first of all, there seems to have been a little bit of a concern about the avodah zarah, or idolatry. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later on. So that was one objection, potentially. Another one was that some of these books were just distracting. So if you were the chazan, if you were leading the services in the synagogue, and you had this big, beautiful manuscript, and it was illustrated with scenes, and it was illuminated, and the light is shining back up at you, and some of the pictures may have been a little risque even by today's standards. So it was distracting, and it was the Maharam who raised an objection to this, and he said that these types of manuscripts should not be used in the synagogue. So we see that there was some objections to it. So we see a split at the very beginning, coming back to Haggadot specifically. There was a split specifically between Haggadot produced in the Sephardic world and those produced in Ashkenaz. And it's very easy to tell the difference between these early illustrated Haggadot. The Sephardic Haggadot, those produced in Spain, generally contained illustrations at the very beginning of the Haggadah. You would have anywhere from 5, 10, or even more pages of just full-page miniature illustrations. Miniature here does not mean miniature as in small. It just means that it was a full illustration inside of a border. So you would have all these pages at the beginning, and they had nothing to do actually with Passover or the Seder service. It was usually a biblical cycle. And it would be anywhere, it could be just the patriarchal period, or it could go further, and sometimes it went all the way up to the Exodus or all the way through the Exodus. And when you get to the Haggadah text itself, you might find decoration, but you won't really find too much actual illustrations. In Ashkenaz, on the other hand, there you're not going to find these cycles at the beginning with these full-page miniatures, but you will find textual illustrations in the margins throughout, sometimes linked directly to what the text is talking about. So that's a very easy way. Can I pass something around?
Mhm.
Sure. I thought I brought it. I'm sorry I didn't. One of the most famous Haggadot that was produced in the Sephardic world is the Sarajevo Haggadah. Oh, okay, you have a copy, so you know what it looks like. So when you go home, if you open it up, you'll see the first, it's actually pretty long in the Sarajevo, and it's not called the Sarajevo Haggadah because it was produced in Yugoslavia. That's just where it's in Sarajevo today, but it was produced in Spain. Now, I mentioned before that there was a little bit that there was some opposition to illustrations in certain parts of the world, specifically in Spain. There were objections. It seems like there were objections to figural depictions of humans. So we're actually going to jump in right now. So for people who did not have a Haggadah, most people in the Middle Ages probably did not even own a single book. And if they did own a book, it was not going to be an illustrated or illuminated book either. So for people who did not have a Haggadah and they wanted 30 days before the holiday starts, where we're supposed to start preparing, where are they supposed to prepare? So they can go to a Bible. So we're going to start with the Bible right now. So the Bible that we're looking at right now, this is a Sephardic Bible called a Mikdashiyah, and it was called thus because in the Sephardic world, for them, their Bibles took the place after the Churban, after the destruction of the temple, took the place of the temple itself. And many of them, they're very large and imposing, and they're beautifully decorated and illuminated and somewhat illustrated. We'll see in a minute. So over here, this is at the beginning of this Bible. It was produced in Catalonia in northern Spain. We don't know exactly when, but around 1300. So far, we haven't seen any human figures, correct? All right. So we're here at this page over here. Over here, we see this beautifully painted page over here, a carpet page, but still no human figures, no scenes. And now over here, we have some type of illustrative specimen over here, but still no human figures. What we have over here, these are the implements and furniture of the tabernacle. Yes, that is gold leaf. Yeah, I'm gonna get to that in a second. That is gold leaf. And this is very common that you'll find in Spanish Bibles, again, because for them, this was a replacement for the temple. And just because they didn't have the temple, they would take these Bibles. It was like a portable temple, just like the tabernacle was in the desert and in the land of Israel until the temple was constructed. So this is a very common double-page spread that you'll find in Spanish Bibles of the period. And as Rabbi Zach just pointed out, you'll notice over here that this is gold. And this was particularly expensive to produce. This is not gold magic marker or even gold paint. This is technically, when we talk about an illuminated manuscript, this is a perfect example. This is actual gold. In this case, it's gold leaf. And what they would do first is a draftsman would draw the outline of whatever it is, that was supposed to be depicted. And then the illuminator would apply a layer of gesso over here and build up a base. And then they would apply a very, very thin layer of gold. And the idea was when you would open up the book, okay? When you would open up the book under a light source, the light would hit this gold illumination and it would reflect back up in you, and it would illuminate the manuscript for the reader. And this was the most expensive part, and this is the most deluxe part of a medieval manuscript, is the illumination. Just going to go a little further in this Bible. So here we get to the text itself. I thought I had another picture. This is an incredibly large volume. It's about 12 by 15 inches, and it's 5 inches thick. So it's quite a large volume. Over here, we actually get to the text of the Tanakh itself. This one was written in 2 columns, and we see here, okay, sorry. We see over here, this is the actual text of the Bible, 2 columns. We have the consonants, Those are the large letters. Underneath, we have small dots and lines and other symbols. Those are the vowels and also the musical neumes or notes that would instruct somebody how they're supposed to chant it. And then in the middle, we have these tiny little letters, these little cryptic letters, and on the top and bottom also. This is called the Masorah. After the scribe would finish writing the manuscript, there were multiple people involved in producing the manuscript, forgetting about the art, just the text. So, and sometimes one person would have more than one task, or sometimes it was very individualized and very specific. The scribe would write the consonants. Somebody else might come and do the vowels and the other marks like the truck, the tamim, those are the musical notes. And then a third person who's called a masoret, he would come and he had actually the most important job. He was the proofreader. And he would go through it and he would check every single letter and every single dot and every single line to make sure that there are no mistakes. And all those little marks that you see over here, these cryptic little marks, all abbreviations, these are all the notes of that third person, the masoret. And these were his sort of like his spell check, or if people who do coding, sometimes there's like an extra little packet that that you put into the coding, and make sure that the code is correct for that line of code. That's sort of what this was. And if somebody later on was reading this Bible and he said, "Oh wait, this doesn't make sense. I think this is misspelled," he would look over here in the margin and look at this cryptic note. And just to give you one specific example, the most common note you're going to find is of the letter Lamed. And the letter Lamed stands for the Aramaic late, which means not. And that's an indication that this word is only found one time in the entire Bible in this form. Now, we don't always know exactly what does that mean. It could be the only spelling, the only musical note like this, or we're not sure, we don't know exactly what does it mean, but it means that it's the only time you're going to find it spelled this way. So if it says, "Oh, that looks strange," but I see that Lamed there, I'm saying, "Oh, okay, fine." The master checked it. And this is an exception, and for whatever reason, it is spelled that way. And on the top and the bottom, those are also Masoretic notes. Over here, the masoret is going to explain sometimes. So if he says a word appears 3 times with this particular spelling, he may, on the top or on the bottom, he may indicate where are the 3 places. He'll give you a few words of that verse in other parts of the Bible, okay? And the reason why today our Bibles are 99%, exactly like the way Bibles were 1,000, 2,000 years ago, really is because of the work of these Masoretes. So what was missing? What have we not seen through this beautiful Bible? People, right? We haven't seen any people. So the Bibles that were produced in Spain, especially at this period, you will never find any person. You'll find at the beginning, you'll find the temple, the tabernacle instruments and furniture. You'll find the carpet pages. Sometimes you'll see some micrography. We'll see what that is in the next slide, coming up with the notes of the masoret. And we'll see different types of art, but we're not going to see any representations of figures. We're not sure why. So the theory is because this was produced in Spain, which had been ruled for a very long time by Muslim rulers, and there was a very strong Muslim culture. The problem with this theory, though, is that, especially in Catalonia, where this particular manuscript and many of these manuscripts were produced, by this point, the Muslims had been pushed back. Actually, further south even, the Muslims had been pushed back much, much earlier. And in many areas where these manuscripts were being produced, there never even had been a Muslim presence. So it's not exactly clear. And then later on, I mentioned that some Haggadot that come from Spain do have at the beginning, like the Sarajevo Haggadah, do have figures. And there are some theories for why we'll find the figures in Haggadot, but we won't find them in Bibles. We're not going to get into that now because we want to move forward and see some of the real beautiful stuff. But that's just one thing to keep in mind, is that in these Spanish Bibles, we're not going to see any figures. There are some exceptions a little bit later on, but for the most part, we're not going to see any figures. So now we're going to switch over, and we're going to go to Ashkenaz. I'm going to refer to Germany, even though of course there was no Germany back then, just like there was no Spain either. But we'll talk about culturally a German center, or Ashkenaz. This is the Ashkenazi Bible. We're not sure exactly when it was produced, but the beginning of within the first 2 decades of the 14th century. And it is comes from the Lake Constance region. We know the name of the scribe, even though he doesn't sign it anywhere, but 3 places in the manuscript where his name appears, his name is Chaim, and where that name Chaim appears in the Bible, he actually puts a little bit extra ornamentation over his name. So that was a common way that scribes would sometimes hint to what their name was. And just in case there's any doubt to whether this is just purely by chance, there are 2 other manuscripts that were produced within this 2 decades, within a 2-decade period, 2 other manuscripts, all by the same scribe. We know because the handwriting is separate and the art is the same. One example I just saw last night actually is in Tehillim in Psalms. There's an illustration of King David playing a harp, and it's exactly the same, the way it appears here and the way it appears in the tripartite Machzor. So it's exactly the same. It's very, very distinct from the way that David is depicted in other illustrated Hebrew manuscripts of the period. So there's no, and those manuscripts also, he puts these little fancy signs over the word Chaim. So we know that his name is Chaim. So here, this is really a beautiful page over here. Now over here, the text appears in 3 columns. So the first element of the beauty that we see here is actually just the letters themselves. The calligraphy or the text, the calligraphy itself is an art form. And if there were nothing else in this Bible other than the calligraphy, that in itself would make it a beautiful volume. However, it goes further than that. So first of all, again, we have the Masorah here. We have those little notes in the columns, and we have the longer Masorah on the top and on the bottom. And over here, we see, this is what I was talking about. Sometimes it'll go up into these little forms, or also blocked over here a little bit, but you see it along the bottom over here. And that's called micrography, is when they would write the text in little tiny letters and form it into geometric forms, or sometimes even into human forms or animal forms or scenes. Okay, so I do have it here on the bottom. What I wanted to show you in this one is the complete opposite of the Spanish Bible that we just looked at. And this is to give you a better appreciation of the beauty of the calligraphy itself. This is a penny on the bottom. This Bible measures only 6.5 by 9 by 2.5 inches. This is much smaller than the other Bible, and it's a complete Bible. Also, it has the 24 books of the Hebrew Scripture, and yet the scribe was able to do it with such a fine hand, and it's just beautiful to to hold the volume and to look at the text. So over here, that's the penny on the bottom, just to give you some scale. Okay, back to the Masorah over here. The reason why they would sometimes do this micrography is because the scribe had to lay out the page, and you had to have a very specific layout. There's no computer layout back then. So you had to have in mind in advance what each page is going to look at, 20, 50, 100 pages before he ever got to all those pages in advance. So generally, there was a set number of lines on the top and on the bottom. Here we have 2 on the top. We have 2 all the way on the top, and then we have 3 on the bottom. But sometimes he would get to the bottom and he can't fit it all in. So he would squeeze in these extra words by making a diagram or some type of representation on the bottom. Or on the top, the same thing he would do on the top. And the reason why he couldn't come down on the side or on the bottom come up is because he had the small Masorah notes over there. Now, obviously, we had this already in the Spanish Bible, and obviously there's something else on this page that I haven't spoken about yet. If we come here in the middle, you see here this beautiful color. So this says Ve'ela Shemot. This is the beginning of the book of Exodus. And a very common way of decorating Hebrew books, or actually, I'm sorry, any manuscript in the medieval period was to have a large initial letter. So if you look at Latin manuscripts, a lot of times the very first letter could be of a book or of a chapter or the section of the book. That one letter will be much, much larger, and it'll very often be enclosed within a border, and it'll be like its own panel, and it can have illustrations inside of it. And sometimes you'll even see that today in contemporary books, where in printed books, you'll also see the first letter of a chapter is enlarged. Now, in Hebrew, we don't have capital letters. So you generally will not find a large initial letter, but although you do find there are There are some places where you'll find it, but generally they'll make the first word large in the border. And in this case, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, the scribe did two words going across over here, the Ve'ela Shemot. And it's surrounded here in this beautifully painted border. And it also has here the gold, that gold leaf that's applied, which we were discussing before. So this was a very exquisite and took a lot of time to execute this. So we're looking at this page, and I'm going to ask a question of all these different elements, looking at it aesthetically. We said the calligraphy, we spoke about the micrography, we spoke about now this beautifully illustrated, decorated initial word panel. We have the illumination in there. What was the most important part of this volume, of this page? So, we were taking all these factors into account. Was it the text that was the most important, just the basic Bible text? Was it the Masoretic notes, what the Masoretic wrote, or was it the art? Does anybody have any ideas what might have been considered the most important part of this page? I don't know that there's a right answer. This is what I felt when I was looking at this.
Aesthetically, it's got the symmetry to it, the way it's actually physically laid out.
Yes.
And so the way the art breaks it up, symmetry.
I'm curious though, are the columns now straight down, or those two shorter columns go over and the two shorter columns on the other side? You know what I'm saying?
No. You're talking about the two rows on top.
The two rows that are split by the
okay.
English look.
Right. Okay. So the first column goes from the top, starting on the right, because this is a Hebrew manuscript.
Right. The middle column.
Right. So the first column on the right starts at the top and goes all the way down to the bottom.
Right.
Then it starts up in the middle column all the way at the top. We're finishing up the book of Genesis now.
Right.
Gets halfway down to the middle.
Right. And goes
over here. Then restarts over here at the top, goes down over here. Now here, over here, restart to Eila Shemot, and Exodus continues over here. And also, it's hard to see here on the screen, but over here is the Masoretic note for the, I can't see it by heart, but I remember it. I think it's over here. It tells you the total number of verses that are in the book of Genesis. So that's over here in this column, because that's where it ends over here. Now, it could be for whatever reason, the scribe wanted to make this panel extra large. I don't know why, but an idea just came to me. I'll tell you in a second when we get to the next page. So I'm going to say that between the three elements of text, Masoretic proofreading, and the art, I think the art was the most important here when this book was being produced. The reason why is if you look at the two reasons. One is if you look at the words Ve'ela Shemot, do you notice anything that's missing? Maybe hard to see. There's no nekudot, there's no vowels, so all those little dots and lines we don't see in what Isaac said. There's no trop. We don't see the musical notes here, so they're missing. The truth is they're not missing. If you look very, very closely, you may see, I can't see so closely now myself either. I think under the shin, there's one little dot over there from the shva. There should be two dots over there. And in other panels, sometimes you will see more dots and lines, and others you're going to see less. And in other places where some of the paint has rubbed off, you can see the dots and the lines and all the musical notes. So it's clear that the order of producing these manuscripts was that first the scribe would write the letters, and then the vowelizer, which may have been in some cases the scribe, also he would add the vowels underneath and below and on top. And then the final step would be to add the artwork and the illumination and all the painting and then the illumination. So some people will look at these two words and they won't be able to read them. But that wasn't the main concern here. The main concern was to make this look as beautiful as possible, even at the risk of causing damage to the actual text. And it's also possible, we're not going to get into this tonight, there's also a question of who's doing this work, if they were Jews or not Jews. In terms of the artwork and specifically the illumination, there's a big debate, specifically when you're talking about certain areas and certain times, but it could be the person that was doing some of this painting and illumination, he wasn't even cognizant of what he was doing and how he was maybe causing some people not to be able to read the text. There's one manuscript, I don't remember which one that I saw the other day, where the word is Vayehi. I think I think I think it's at the beginning of Megillat Ruth, the book of Ruth, where there's a trup on top of the word Vayihi, and there's a line connecting the top of the word to that trup. I think it's that. And in that case, the panel, the initial panel, is drawn around the word, and it's covering up all the dots except for that one dot on top of Vayihi, and the border goes around it. And now over there, I'm assuming that it was somebody who really didn't know Hebrew, because I'm completely guessing here, because he covered up everything else, but he did not cover up that part. He may have been looking at this and thought it was part of the letter, because that dot was connected to the letter by the line. But I'm just guessing over there. The other thing to take into account is this Masorah that I was talking about, which is so important. And this is really the reason why Bibles today are 99% exactly the same as they were 1,000 years ago and earlier, is because of this Masoretic notes. The truth is, at this point already, at the beginning of the 14th century, it's not clear how many people could use this Masoretic apparatus. Even when it was first being executed in the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries, it was really restricted, this work, to these tiny schools in Tiberias in the land of Israel, and in Babylon, and in some other places in the land of Israel. And these were very, very specialized scholars, and this is what they devoted their lives to. And even in their own times, most people could probably not decipher these comments. And certainly by the time of the 14th century, when the text had already really been fixed and corrected by these earlier Masoretes, there's a sense that this Masoretic notes over here were still being included for two reasons. One is just tradition. That's the way the Masoretic Bibles have always been written, and that's the way they're going to continue to be written. And again, there's also an art form to it, so they're going to include it for aesthetic purposes. The second, that's just my guess. 2 weeks ago, I heard a lecture by Professor Ofer from Alon Shvur in Israel, and he was using a Harley manuscript, and he gets to a point, this is in the Torah, and he's reading a Masoretic note. So in the small Masorah, the scribe writes that this word, or whatever it is, I don't remember exactly, but this phenomenon appears 3 times or 6 times in the Bible. And then he elaborates, and he says 2 of the times it appears in the Torah, and he lists what they are. And he says, I don't remember where else in the Bible this word appears like this, but I know for sure, whatever it is, that it appears 6 times. Again, they didn't have computer searches, they didn't have Google, they didn't have concordances. So even this Masorete, who's writing a little bit later than the earliest Masoretes, already he lost some of this education or knowledge. So it may still be included just as an aesthetic thing. Now, the most beautiful part of this book is the first page, and this is what we're going to spend a little bit of time on now. So you see over here in the middle, we have the word Breshit, in the beginning, Genesis. This is the first word of the book of Genesis. So whereas before we saw the initial word panels was 1 word, or in the book of Exodus it was 2 words, over here you have an entire page that's devoted just to this 1 word. And again, if you look closely, you'll see the dots, I think, are mostly covered up underneath and on top. And the reason why I think maybe Exodus, he had 2 words fit over there, I'm just guessing, because everywhere else I think it's just 1 word. Maybe he didn't want to go from a complete page to having 1 little word, so sort of a transition. I don't know. But enough about the initial word panels. What we're going to spend a few minutes on right now, you see these little circles. Okay, there's 46 of these little round drills going all the way around from top to bottom. It starts at the right, goes to the left, goes to the next line, goes to the next line. There are 46 of them. And if you look really close, there are 46 small illustrations. These are scenes that are, these are narrative representations of what's going on in the biblical text. And just to go back 1 slide, I want to show you how small this book is and how small these tiny little pictures are. I'm going to show you now the pictures close up. But remember, each one of these little round drills is only the size of a penny. When we get to the first one over here, and look at the beautiful detail. And again, this is just the size of a penny. Now we're looking at this picture. This, anybody know what this picture might be showing? It's a little hard to know, actually. It's not so clear.
Esav.
Oh, you're halfway. It's not Haggadah, but
Jagenhaus?
somewhat related with the animals.
The
So this is actually Esav. When when Jacob is on his Yaakov is on his deathbed, he calls his eldest Esav and orders him to go out and get him his last meal, as it were. And after the meal, he's going to give Esav the blessing of being the firstborn. Esav goes out to hunt for the food, and meanwhile, Rivka, Esav's mom, I'm sorry, Rivka, Jacob's mom, is all upset because she wants Jacob to get the blessing of the firstborn. So she goes and she comes up with this whole ruse so that Jacob can get the firstborn. I'm sorry, can get the blessing of the firstborn. Meanwhile, Esav is out hunting. Okay, and eventually, so first Jacob goes, and Jacob can't really see. He's not sure what's going on, and he even says, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the voice says it feels like Jacob, but the hands in the hands of Esav, because Jacob is wearing hair, like fur as hairy animal skins on his arms, so he would be like Esav. And Jacob gets the blessing of the firstborn, and he leaves, and then Esav comes back, and Esav is very upset and threatens to, says he's going to kill Jacob, so he can. So this is showing Esav coming back to going to his father. And right, so it's a hare. He's carrying a hare over his shoulder, and it looks like these are two hunting dogs, maybe that he's out with. So somebody who wrote about this a couple of years ago, he was very perplexed by this, and he says this doesn't make sense because Jacob was an observant Jew, and
Yes, sir.
how could he eat a hare? Esav knew that, so he used this as sort of proof to show that the artist here was not Jewish, because he said no good Jewish artist would have drawn this little illustration. So when I read that to me, didn't make so much sense to me, because anytime something like this comes up in the Bible, there are plenty of examples where we question, well, why did the patriarch do this, or why did somebody do that? Because it goes sort of against what we understand today to be Jewish law to be. And one of the responses is that that before the giving of the Torah, the patriarchs didn't always keep all the commandments. So maybe Jacob didn't keep this particular commandment. So this was not such a surprise to me. But then the other thing is, I looked up this one. I didn't know offhand, but I went to look it up because it's something I saw later on. There's actually an early midrash that's preserved in the Targum, and I think Breshit Rabbah and in the Tanchuma, that when Esav went out to go hunting, God caused him to be delayed so that Jacob would get back first. And Esav got all upset and he couldn't find anything. So he just grabbed a hare. He couldn't find a kosher animal or any animal. He finally caught a hare and he went back, and that's what he was going to give his father. So this actually not only is this not something that maybe was drawn by a non-Jew. This was definitely, or if it was not drawn by a Jew, the instructions were given to the artist by a Jew. I'm going to show you a couple of other medallions. Here, this shows Joseph when Jacob dispatches Joseph to go out to find his brothers in the fields where they're shepherding the flocks. And the Torah says that on the way he meets a person and he says, "Have you seen my brothers?" We look at the picture over here, and the first thing we notice is that he has angel wings attached to his back. That's not a person, that's an angel, but the Torah doesn't say anything about an angel. But again, if you look in an early Targum source in the Midrash, it talks about an angel greeting Joseph. And after I saw this, that was when I went back and I looked up the round drawer with Esau. Here's another one. This one I was not familiar with Midrash, but this shows on the right we have Joseph, who's living as the viceroy in Egypt. This is Judah, and that's Benjamin. Okay, this is here. Joseph ordered the brothers to come back with Benjamin for the second time. They come back, and he says, "Okay, you leave Benjamin with me, and now you can go." And Judah couldn't go back to his father without his, the youngest son Benjamin. And he approaches Joseph, and in the Hebrew text it says, "Vayigash Yehudah," and Yehudah approached. And I'm looking at this, and I noticed that Judah's arm is reaching for his sword over here. And it was strange to me for a few reasons. First of all, what was Judah doing walking around with a sword? And why does he have his hand on it as he's approaching the viceroy? You know, in the real world, he would have been jumped on by the Secret Service at this point, unless this is one of the scenes where they're alone in the room. But then also I went back and I looked at the round drills before this, and none of the brothers are carrying any arms. So it was inserted into this picture, you know, specifically. And again, the Midrash talks about that when Judah realized that Benjamin was going to make Judah return to his father without Benjamin, he went to reach for his sword. And he said, if you don't give me back Benjamin, you know, that's going to be the end of you. But his hand froze and he wasn't able to pull it out. So again, this is all rooted in Midrash. And the last one I'm going to show you here, there are others. We're going to come back at the very end. This is showing, we're getting up to the Pesach story over here. Okay, so this is showing the Pharaoh's daughter, and she's with one of her servants, and they're at the Nile River. And here Moses, he's a baby, he comes floating along the ark. And the text says, "Vatishlach et amata," and she stretches forth her amah to take in the, to take out Moses from the Nile. So it says she sent out her amah. The question is, what does the word amah mean? So amah can actually mean two things, sort of. If it does not have a dot in the mem, then it means her servant. And if it does have a dot in the mem, this is why the little intricacies of grammar do make a difference when one is leaning and reading from the Torah in shul and synagogue. It means, an amah means her forearm, okay, which also then comes to mean the measurement of the forearm. So here again, we see here, this is based not on the literal reading of the text, but on an early midrash where her arm, like an Inspector Gadget type of a thing, her arm elongated. She didn't send her servant in, but just elongated to take out Moshe. Okay, so we're going to move ahead now. This is now really going to get into the crux of the matter. Before we go ahead, one question that I have, which I don't have an answer for. So we see here a clear difference between this Bible and the Spanish Bible. We see human figures. In the Spanish Bible, we did not see any human figures. One question that I have is, if it is true that the reason why there was this hesitancy to use human figures, even though again this was years later, or maybe in a region where there had been no Muslim presence ever in Spain, Jewish law actually prescribes not just human figures, but other types of representation also, like the sun and other things. So even in Bible, in some of these Bibles, where you'll see the sun or other elements, but you won't see human figures. So if you can't have human figures, how can you have the sun and these other elements? I'm not sure why. Okay, so we're coming up now. This is, by the way, I'm sorry if I didn't mention until now. Every single item that we're going to be seeing on here, except for maybe one or two little ones at the end, these all come from the Jeanie Schottenstein collection. So these are all items that I've seen up person, and I'm sorry I wanted to get into it because we had that late start, but my thanks go to Jeanie Schottenstein for opening up their collection and giving me the wonderful opportunity to study and spend so much time with these really are treasures of the Jewish people, and then to have the opportunity to share them with you. So all these items, even if they don't say Schottenstein on top, it all comes from the Schottenstein family collection. This is an Italian machzor. So this one already, we know exactly where it's from. It's from 1441. It's Italian. We're not sure exactly where, perhaps Florence. And this machzor is important for a few reasons. First of all, just the minhag, or the rite of the liturgy. Many of us were familiar with, there's a Sephardic liturgy, which we usually call Middle Eastern, even though technically it's not, but we distinguish between Sephardic and Ashkenaz. And then, of course, there are many subdivisions within those two rites. But there was also a third major rite called the Italian rite, or also sometimes called Nusach B'nai Roma, the sons of Rome. And that was a distinct rite, completely separate from Ashkenaz or German, Central European, and completely separate from Sephardic, from Spanish, and then later Ottoman and Middle Eastern. And they preserved their own rite through the centuries, and they did a pretty good job of it. Ashkenaz and the Ashkenazic and Sephardic rites underwent many changes through the centuries, and the Italian rite much less so. We're going back now to a large volume. This one is 11 by 15 by 4 inches. I think on the next page I have my little penny. Nobody has coins. Actually, I'll look around to get a penny. So this is just to give you a sense of scale. Again, all these books that we've been looking at, these are all manuscripts, which means they're written by hand. They've all been on animal skins. They're all painted by hand, decorated by hand, and illuminated by hand. This is 1441, so there is printing already, not movable type. There is block printing. We don't have any Hebrew printing that we know of yet, but there are Latin books and other languages being done by block printing. So we have this manuscript. So this is a machzor. So you're all wondering, if I said we're going to get into this now, really going to get into the Haggadah, why are we looking at a machzor? So when we talk about a machzor in the medieval period, and even in the Italian world, and in the Sephardic world much later on, machzor really encapsulated the entire cycle, the entire annual cycle, liturgical cycle. So in this machzor, we're going to have a Haggadah, and we're going to look at that for a minute. This is the opening page. There is no what we call title page. There's nothing with the title and an author. This is the opening page of the manuscript. It doesn't start with the text that's going to be familiar to most of us. To be honest, I had to look it up, even though we had to learn this in 11th grade in high school for the Bechina Yerushalmi, but I didn't remember it. This is Keter Malchut by Ibn Gabirol. And one of the things that threw me off is that the main word, which you can all see here in the middle, because it's in the initial word panel, it's beautifully painted. This is a special type of painting over here, where it's left a little blank. And then you have the gold leaf around it, and it's niflaim, and it didn't sound familiar to me at all. I can't see over here. There's another circle that says Keter Malchut. And the reason why niflaim gets the first word, we said usually the initial word panel is going to be the first word of a book, of a chapter, of a section, because the text that comes before this word niflaim, which you're not going to see, it starts all the way up over here, and it continues over here, and it says, it's basically Ibn Gabirol's introduction, and he says, my poem, this was called Keter Malchut over here. So niflaim technically is the first word of the poem proper. And we see all around this beautiful border. We see with hybrids and floral decoration, animals. I can't see so well myself. I don't know if you can see, but there are hunting scenes. I think on the top, it may be hard for you to see, but there's a hybrid here holding a bow and arrow. He has dogs chasing. I can't see what animal it is over here. On the bottom over here and over here, there are hybrids with bugles, animals all the way around. Here's another hybrid over here. Just beautiful. It has a lot of introductory matter. Before we get to Picturesque de Zimra, the morning psalms that we read every morning, there is a illuminated illustration of the temple menorah. Again, because we're starting the morning prayer, so it's a reminder for us of the temple where the daily service was performed. Okay, now we get to the Haggadah itself, right? This manuscript, I forget exactly, I think it's about 500 or 600 pages. It's really a giant manuscript. So it's hard even to see where the Haggadah starts. But if we look on the bottom over here, we have an initial word panel, and it says Seder. I can't see it myself. It's too small for me to see. I think Seder Mitzvot Haggadah. All right, so it's not such an elaborate introduction to what is a major part of this volume. You get over here, it starts talking about the Kiddush, the sanctification that we make over wine, that one makes over wine on at the Seder Passover Eve. And again, it's beautiful. We have here all over the place these initial word panels that are painted. We have in the margin, we have this decoration, the scroll and decoration in the margins. What I'm saying, it's nothing special. The truth is, it really is beautiful. But this already is at like page, I can't see on the bottom, I think 80, it's too small for me to see on my screen. It's going through 80 pages of like this, again, which would have taken a lot of time back then. But I was expecting something else at the beginning of the Haggadah. Okay, here we go. Now all of a sudden, I get hit in the face when I'm looking at this. Halachmanya, even though it looks like a chet, that's okay. Sometimes they would join the hay, the two parts of the hay were joined to look like a chet, that's all right. So this is the beginning of the Haggadah proper, because everything before that, the sanctification is very similar to the same sanctification over wine that one would make on Sabbath Eves or other holiday Eves with minor changes. So in an earlier period, maybe when somebody wasn't commissioning such a large manuscript, they would actually leave out the earlier parts. And we see that sometimes in other manuscripts where the only thing that they're going to include are the unique parts to that day, maybe very obscure liturgical poems that one would not otherwise know by heart or be familiar with. So this really is the beginning of the Haggadah proper. So we have this beautiful panel over here, and it's not just around the word, but it goes up and into the margins. And somebody, I don't know if it was Rabbi Zach, if you had asked before about the columns, or somebody else, we're looking before how the pages are laid out with one long column and then two columns that were short on top and short on the bottom. All this had to be laid out in advance. The scribe couldn't get up to this part all of a sudden, now decide that he's going to lay out the page this way. So when he gets to this page or even before, he has to know how he's going to lay out this beautiful panel in the middle. So over here we have some more illustrations. So in terms of if they drew like in a model book on the side, that I don't know. I don't know.
Right, it's very elaborate.
Usually what they would do first is, again, there were many stages to this type of manuscript. The first stage in terms of the decoration, and often it would be the artist himself who's doing it, and you can see because the decoration will sometimes come out of the letters, or you can tell from the ink or the hand. You will first have the outline of the drawing, and then only later on, they'll then fill it in with the paint, and then the last stage would be the illumination of the gold, or very rarely you'll see some silver leaf also. The reason why we know this is because very often in manuscripts, you see pages that were not completed, that were in various stages. The most famous Haggadah is the Prado Haggadah, and that you see different pages in all sorts of different stages of preparation. You see some pages that are complete with the full illumination and all the gold, and other pages that have the words and some of the outwork outlined and maybe some words painted, and then others that only have outlines. So we see from manuscripts like that. You can see it in a few places in this particular manuscript. I don't have any slides. Jeanie and Schottenstein, they just acquired a different manuscript recently, and there you see it very clearly, especially as you get further into the manuscript. I don't know if because time ran out or money ran out, or for whatever reason, because sometimes these manuscripts were done over many years or even generations or centuries. Stuff was always added later on. In some cases, there's an idea that this was like an open manuscript. It's not a published book, and elements were added over time or changed. So in this new manuscript that they just Schottenstein's acquired, we do see that as you go deeper into the manuscript, various stages, and it's obvious where a scribe had planned to do something, or the patron or the artist, and they just never got up to it. Okay, so just to look at the illustrations we have over here, this is Pesach, the Paschal lamb sacrifice. That was brought for the sacrifice. Over here we have, this is a matzah that's illuminated in gold. And again, just with this beautiful border all the way around.
Interesting feature. There's a couple of human heads in this.
So these are hybrids. This is brought in. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, but we're not going to really have time. We're finishing up, and I just want to show a couple other things. There's a lot of tension that one sees when going through these manuscripts. First of all, the idea of having a book. I'm calling them a book. We usually think of a book as a printed book, but I'm going to refer these manuscripts are books as we commonly think of them. You open up a cover and you have books, and they're bound, and you turn the pages. The technical word for that would be a codex, because earlier on they didn't have books like this. We'll call them a book, or the book of Joshua or Haggadah or whatever book it is. But they were written on scrolls, and that was the basic support. That was the basic form of the support for any written text. And in about the 2nd century, the early Christians moved from scrolls to what was called a codex. It was originally done in the Roman world or in other parts also with wooden tablets and wax tablets. They would bind these tablets together, and then they moved on to a little bit with papyrus, but that was very hard to do because it's not, it's too brittle, thank you. And they finally settled on animal skins. It was the best material, it's very durable. After you treat it, it's very easy to write on and has good longevity. So the Christians started using it in the 2nd century, supposedly to distance themselves from Jews. And Jews then did not adopt the Codex. It's said to distance themselves from Christians for many centuries. The Codex was adopted by all the surrounding cultures in the Near East and other parts of Europe. The Jews, they clung to the scroll for a good few centuries. And it's not really until the end of the millennium that Jews finally make that full transition, and you don't really see scrolls anymore. Already by the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, you're seeing codices, especially for large works like the Bibles. You'll see codices. Okay.
You're right, this is held up beautiful.
I'm sorry?
You're right, this is held up beautiful.
Yeah. So we had there was this early tension just in the form of what a book is going to look like. Are they going to use are they going to use a codex, or are they going to use a scroll? So already there seems to may have been that type of tension. And then the codex is finally adopted, but there's still tension with them when it comes to art. So that's what we were seeing in the Bibles, is that in certain parts of the world there seems to have been a reluctance to do some type of art, but other types of art were okay. And here in Italy, you see they're using hybrids are okay, other types of magical and legendary features. And you'll see in Italian volumes much more than you will see in Spanish volumes, actual human figures.
The upper right corner doesn't.
I can't see it. I see a face. I think that's a hybrid. I can't see it.
It's a plant. Here, here. It's really interesting.
Right. So a lot of times you'll have a mixed figure coming with a human head and an animal body, or some type of floral body, a scroll. And you'll see two different hybrid composed of two different animals. It's very common again, and that's just coming from the contemporary art, that they're just borrowing the art forms. Over here we see what Maror looks like. So first of all, these volumes are very important for a few reasons. First of all, it teaches us how they observed the holidays. So different communities have different traditions of what they use for Maror, and you could use these manuscripts to see, well, what did they use for Maror? Another reason why they're important is because I mentioned before about the poems. These manuscripts have unique poems in them, and poems that we will not find anywhere else. And today the prayer books have somewhat become standardized within the particular rite. But back then, every local community had their own liturgy, and you would go from one town even to the next, and you would have different special poems to recite on one Sabbath a year. This community would have one poem, and you find in this volume poems you will not find anywhere else. And we find that here. We also find strange customs. So over here in the Haggadah, we have the text talks about v'im rotzin lishtat kos chamishi v'varchim bar priyaget. So it's talking here if somebody wants to drink a 5th cup of wine at the Seder. So we all know that the Seder has 4 cups of wine, and I was blown away when I saw this. So it seems to be that there was a variant custom, or perhaps it was the dominant custom even in antiquity, to drink 5 cups of wine and not 4. It's clear from Yerushalmi and many early rabbinic sources, and also the Babylonian Talmud from manuscripts, where they read 5 cups of wine. And for whatever reason, later the dominant custom came to be 4. There were attempts over the generations to revive that custom. The Maharal, which is later than this, much more recently in Israel, Rav Kasher, who edited Torah Shlema, if anybody's familiar with that. But I didn't realize it was this early, and I couldn't believe it when I saw this. So again, I mean, other people know, but I never would have known that there were those in Italy who were doing this, had this custom. Over here, I think we have an example of one of these liturgical poems. At some point, the scribe actually writes, here I stopped writing because I'm skipping a bunch of poems because we don't say these anyway. I was like, thank God, because I have to get to the end of this volume already. And I'm just gonna go on. a little bit here. This is a printed, we move into printed texts. When books are first printed in the 1500s, here as opposed to with the manuscripts taken on codices, the book form from the scroll, Jews were actually early adopters within for the 50s, 60s. Within about 15 years or so, Jews are already printing books in Italy and in Spain. And Jews were actually the first to print books in any language in Portugal, in the North Africa, and in the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire. If I remember correctly, I think the first book in not in Hebrew characters, it's not printed in the Ottoman Empire. Don't quote me. I think it's not for another 2 centuries, and it's not Arabic or Turkish. I think it's Armenian. And then later on, eventually, there's printing done in Turkish and Arabic. And I believe that in Europe, the first time that there's any printing done for an Arabic text, they actually use Hebrew characters. And I'm not talking about Judeo-Arabic for a Jewish audience. It was done for Christians who were studying Arabic, and it was printed with Hebrew characters. So Jews are early adopters, and they're printing books all over the place in Italy, Spain, Portugal, and then in Central Europe. But there's still some connection to that manuscript tradition. This is a printed machzor from Mantua from 1557. It's 2 volumes, it's 1,000 pages. It's incredibly rare. The volume itself, this printed volume, even though it's printed, it's rare in of itself. It's even more rare because this particular copy in the Schottenstein collection was printed on animal skin.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, on vellum, all right, which is very, very difficult because it's just the printing in general. It's a technical process. It's very involved. And here, not only is there printing, but we have initial word panels, and we have an illustration of a matzah and the maror. This was incredibly difficult to execute, to print these illustrations on the vellum. But they did it again. There may have been first of all, this was a deluxe item. So in an age when people were no longer commissioning manuscripts anymore, they would print a few of these. They may have even been commissioned. These were deluxe items. Also, it may have been a way for Jews to feel that there was a continuity with the tradition of writing, especially religious items and ritual items on vellum. I just want to keep on jumping. I just want to go to discuss a few more minutes. In terms of the tension and specifically in the artwork. So Rabbi Zach had asked before about, he was talking about the hybrids. And again, I mentioned that those come in from non-Jewish art. And in some cases, they adopt the non-Jewish artwork or art styles just wholesale. So other times it's rejected, and sometimes it's modified. Either it's modified just for the sake of, for whatever reason, modifying it. Sometimes they modify it to make it more Jewish. This is the first complete printed illustrated Haggadah that we know of. There were attempts earlier, probably, that we either only have fragmentary evidence, or that we're not 100% sure if they were really printing an entire Haggadah or something from a different volume. But this is a complete Haggadah printed in Prague in 1526. This actually, sorry, is not, I think this comes from, I'm sorry, I wrote on top. Okay, Mantua. So it was originally done in Prague, 1526. A little bit later in Mantua, they take the text, and it's interesting, they reprint the text exactly the same. They use the exact same types, same letters, and it's laid out line by line exactly the same way. And many of the border illustrations, it's every single page, by the way. It's just incredible to see the volume, the original, every single page, all around it. You have these beautiful ornamental decorated borders with illustrations of people and scenes. So with illustrations, some of them they removed, some of them they moved to different places. One of the ones that was moved a little bit is we have over here, I think this is one of those that was moved. The bottom left is the Chacham, or the wise son. The Haggadah has 4 children at the beginning of the Haggadah. And over here, cursor. So over here at the beginning, we have Chacham, and this is a picture of a Chacham, what he looks like. So where does this illustration come from? I don't know if anybody recognizes this. This is actually yes, this is from the Sistine Chapel. This is Michelangelo's Jeremiah. And it's very clear that this was the model for this woodcut over here of the Chacham. So here they took the image from Michelangelo, they modified it for whatever reason. It's not, as far as I know, I don't think there's any specific Christological elements here. And made a hat that added on the hat over there. That's a typical hat, and it's clearly coming from Michelangelo. Over here, this is the four sons. This is from later on, and this is very, very common. You'll see this in many of the Amsterdam Haggadot, and then in later Haggadot. These are the four sons over here. You see it all over the place. Where do they come from? Over here, I'm just taking one figure. Look at Tom. It's Tom on the left, the simple son of the four sons. And this is coming from a Christian volume, contemporary. And all four of the sons are all coming from this volume. And over here, this happens to be, it comes from an illustration of the prophet Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Samuel anointing King Saul. So here, I mean, it's a Jewish figure, but it's coming from a Christian source, and it has nothing to do with the simple son. In the 18th century, there was a revival of producing manuscripts, and there was a rise of this class of Jews, wealthy court Jews. And even though these are manuscripts again, and they're commissioning scribes, and these are beautiful, all manuscript Haggadot, and these are all being done by hand, mostly on animal skins. They're copying to somewhat of these these Amsterdam and earlier Venetian Haggadot, where the same images are being printed over and over again. So this looks like the same four that we had before, but this is in the manuscript. One little difference, and this makes this Haggadah in the Schottenstein collection probably unique, is if you look at which one? Now, this one I'm showing you just to show that it's the same. I would see again the same. They saw one thing that was unique in these manuscript Haggadah. They didn't slavishly copy the early ones entirely. The songs that we recite at the end, for example, Haggadah, which somebody mentioned before, those do not appear at all in earlier Haggadot. So there was no way to illustrate them because they didn't appear. And when they did appear, it was in the Ashkenaz Haggadot. So for many of these scribes in the 18th century, they're able to use either their imagination or themselves copy from other non-Jewish sources. Over here, this, for example, is this is the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. This is not how it's typically depicted in other Jewish sources. This is really more of a Christian depiction. It's on the bottom, you see it's hard to see. There's a knife by ready to slit his throat over there. Grim Reaper, as it were. This is another one. These are all done by very, very prominent artists from the 18th century. The reason I wanted to show this one, this is the same four of the four sons, but this one I want to show you here, the headgear is a little bit different. It's like turbans, and they're wearing robes on their bodies. This is supposedly unique among all these many Haggadot that were illustrated and by hand. And here, look over here, different, because this one was commissioned probably for Sephardic. Actually, we know it's commissioned for a Sephardic Jew because the name of the patron appears twice, once on the title and once at the end. The last thing I just want to finish up with in terms of the tension that I was discussing continues well into the 20th century when making Haggadot. Okay, this is a Haggadah that I think is very interesting, and just to sort of come full circle, this is a Haggadah that was published in 1958. This is the third edition, actually. It was published for the IDF, the Israeli Army. The editor was Rav Shlomo Goren, Rabbi Goren. He was at the time the chief rabbi of the Israeli military. And there are a few interesting things about this Haggadah. One, as you see over here, it was Nusach Achid. This was the unity rite. No such thing ever existed before, but he felt that he wanted to establish one rite that would unify all Jews living in Israel, particularly in the military, because in the army there's a draft, and this really is a melting pot, and the Jews come from all different backgrounds. How he did the Nusach Achid is a different discussion. Another thing he did is he changed the paragraph of the Halach Manya. He said, we're now living in an independent state. How can we read this text that says, today we are slaves and next year we will be free? He says, it is impossible for us to say a text like this with a straight face, but on the other hand, how can we change the text? So he found an earlier variant, which does speak of us being free, does not mention us being slaves today. So he incorporated that variant on the very top, and he retained the original text. Yes, yeah. The last thing I want to show over here, because a lot of things come full circle in these Haggadot, and things that you might not expect to see. I didn't show you guys before. There's a great Haggadah from the United States, the first illustrated Haggadah printed in America, fully illustrated, completely original illustrations that never appeared before in Europe, all based on Midrashim. It's incredible in 1878. And there's one illustration there showing the evil son sitting tilted back on the cushion. If you guys want to say after, I'll show you. But I just want to show here, we spoke about earlier that there may have been some hesitation to put human forms in. Certainly in later centuries in most of Europe, and certainly in the United States and certainly in Israel, there was no hesitation for human forms, and you see it all over the place. One thing that's interesting here in this Israeli Haggadah, we see over here an officer at the head of the Seder, leading the Seder service. Around him are 1, 2, 3, I should have thought of this now actually. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, is there 10 here? There are 10, okay, fine. So you have one officer sitting at the front with 10 other officers or soldiers sitting around the table and leading the Seder service. So in a lot of these earlier Haggadot, so the Haggadah talks about the 5 sages of Bnei Brak sitting around of the ancient sages, but in the earlier printed Haggadot, you actually see something not 5, but you see more than 5, you see 10 or other numbers, because it's coming from Christian sources, that have nothing to do with the Seder. In some cases, actually it's coming from New Testament scenes, so you see a lot of figures. But over here, does anybody know who the officer sitting at the head leading the Seder services? I think somebody commented in the front over there. Okay, David Sklar commented Herzl. So it could be Herzl. I'm sorry, who did you say? So you're saying Ravgarin. I'm not sure that Herzl would have been able to lead us necessarily to lead a Seder specifically in Hebrew. But actually, I didn't think of. I'm looking. I mean, it definitely does have that likeness to Herzl. Rabbi Zach said Rav Goren. So over here we have an earlier picture, which probably actually dates a little bit later to 1958. To me, this is definitely a likeness of Rav Goren. So we came from 5 or more centuries earlier, where there was perhaps hesitation to have human forms at all, to having human forms, and in some cases they even put in human forms of known people. And here you have a contemporary person, and not only the contemporary person, you have the contemporary person who was the editor of the text itself. And the last thing was talking about coming full circle, Rav Kasher, a year later, the text orders us, and with this I'll finish off, the text orders enjoys all the Seder participants. It says they have to feel, I mean, comes from the Gemara, they have to feel, every participant has to feel as if he or her himself had experienced the redemption of leaving slavery in Egypt and bondage in Egypt and going to freedom and being brought to live, as free people in the land of Israel. And about 30 years ago, there was a synagogue that I was laning in Manhattan Beach, Brooklyn. And there was an elderly man, Mr. Fruchter. And every week I would go to a class that was after the early morning service. And old man Fruchter, as we used to call him, he was a very nice guy. He would sometimes, make comments. I didn't usually understand what he was saying. But one of the times I understood what he was saying is that the person who was teaching the class was discussing, it was before Passover, and it was discussing this commandment that we have to feel as if we ourselves had gone from slavery to freedom. And he gets all excited and he starts saying, I know what it means to go from slavery to freedom. And he says that he was in the camps, I don't remember which camp it was, and he was liberated on Passover Eve. And he said for him, he understood what it meant to go from slavery to freedom because he literally experienced it. For us, it's very difficult to understand what does it mean to go from slavery from freedom. We can read about it, we can look at pictures. But this generation living after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, they understood what it meant. And for Rav Kasher, Rabbi Kasher, he's actually my favorite unsung rabbinic hero of the 20th century. I think he has not received the honor and respect that he deserves. He really did so much in many different areas. One of the things is in this Haggadah that he published in 1950, I mean, you can't escape the mark of the Holocaust in it. He has pictures of the Holocaust in here. But he also has talks about Zionism. It's 1952 years after the creation of the state. He lived in Israel himself. And he has here, these are the 4 cups of redemption. He's out 4 cups of redemption. This beautiful steel engraving. This was the centerpiece of the Haggadah. And then he goes on, if you turn to the next page, the 5th cup, Heveti. You know, Kasher has it. This is actually the Hebrew English volume of the Haggadah. And the Hebrew volume, he has a 30-page appendix discussing the history of 5 cups, trying to show that, you know, this is the way it's really supposed to be, and whether or not it was supposed to be 4 cups or 5 cups. He says today that we're living in 1950, and today is the time to reestablish the custom of having 5 cups. Yeah, I mean, if you come to the house, I'll show you original, the steel. These are steel engravings. It's incredible. It doesn't show up over here. It just looks like a photocopy. It's incredible. That was it.
That's an excellent one, by the way.
Which one?
The Gorfield one, this one?
Yeah. So my last comment is one of the things that I like about this Haggadah. So first of all, it's has to be my daughter's favorite Haggadah. I didn't even think to include this. I had included various reasons. Carmel Winery, Carmel Winery, the Maxwell House Haggadah, and you know, some other iconic, the Miss Meisel Haggadah that I have here, and other iconic Haggadah. But my daughter says, "Oh, you have to put this one in." So if you're watching, Brielle, I put it in for you. I'd like to hear why you like it. One of the reasons that I included for her, but as I was looking it over today and putting the slide in, I said to
Because
myself,
all the text is there within the graphic.
so this is a graphic novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of contemporary, like a lot of things embedded in it that keep attention, especially for the kids, like not little kids. This is for like middle school, high school
Right.
age
My
kids.
daughter is 12. And
Yeah.
I don't know how she was when we
fascinating.
got it
It's
for her.
very- it's
So
very
like Rabbi
fascinating.
Zach mentioned, on the right side, you have the text of the Haggadah on every single page. And then facing it, you have the page of what would be a graphic novel, which is mirroring a mirror of the text on the right. What I thought was interesting about it after looking over my presentation for today is looking at the people who are participating at the Seder, whereas in the earlier Haggadot, you know, the family people sitting there, they weren't even Jewish. You know, I mean, the models for the people sitting there weren't even Jews. And if they were Jews or they were intended to be Jews, they weren't really representative of what, you know, a Jewish family might have looked like. First of all, many of them do not have women, and or they don't have Jews who come from different backgrounds that make Jews look different. And you look through this Haggadah, and it's a traditional Haggadah, but yet it shows Jews the way they really look, you know, male and female, and coming from all different parts of the world.
And he has a scene with Amsu where it's like all these figures, all historical figures, Jonathan Sachs and
Oh, I don't really.
Golden Meyer. You can go through it and try to figure out who everybody is.
I have to go
It's
back.
great. Yeah, take a look.
Anyways, thank you for coming and attending, whether it was live or via Zoom. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them, or if you want to email me or ask in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Welcome.
When